Hey everyone, how's it going? Zaronce here with a quick little Frost DK guide specifically for Battleground PvP. I got a lot of good feedback on my Unholy guide. I got a couple questions about making a Frost DK guide, and so for my fan I decided to come out with this guide and just go over the talent setups that I usually run, how I spec my character, how I gear my character, and yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So one of the big questions right now surrounding Frost DK for new Death Knights coming into the scene is two-hander versus dual wield, right? And so what it pretty much comes down to is this: it's close. Damage-wise, from a pure damage output perspective, it's close. The difference is that a two-hander is going to favor a burst build, whereas dual wielding is going to favor more of a sustained build. And one of the themes throughout this guide is going to be the burst damage that a Frost DK can put out. And for that reason, two-hander is the go-to option. If you have, two one-handers that are just much higher eye level than your two-hander, then sure, go ahead, use your two-hander or use your dual wield setup. But in an ideal situation, you want to use a big, fat two-hander so that you can smack people in the face with juicy obliterates. So the first thing other than that we're going to talk about is your talent builds, and we'll go through each talent row by row and we'll discuss the different options or why you want to go one way or the other. So first row, Inexorable Assault is pretty much what you're always going to run. Icy Talons could be good on paper, but it's unreliable. It requires build up, it requires a little bit of ramp. You got to get to those 3 stacks, and the amount of things that can go wrong in that window while you're building up stacks is there's too many, especially in a BG where you have 10 people potentially trying to limit your ability to connect and deal damage. Your uptime could be low during certain windows. So what would end up happening a lot is you build up those 3 stacks, you're finally about to do good damage, and then you get CC'd or kited or whatever, and the stacks fall off. So it's just not a reliable enough talent to compete with Inexorable Assault. Cold Heart, on the other hand, is nerfed by 50% in PvP. The damage is nerfed by 50% in PvP, which hurts it. But on top of that, you're going to be using Chains of Ice a lot to control the other team and keep them slowed, and buy time for your ranged and your healers, and maybe even kite for yourself. So you are rarely going to have it build up to 20 stacks for any actual decent damage. It's going to be like tiny bits of 2 stacks, 3 stacks, no stacks, as you're spamming Chains of Ice on the other team. So Inexorable Assault, on the other hand, is very useful. It adds to your obliterate damage. It contributes to your obliteration windows, and for that reason, it's not game changing, but it's useful and it brings value. So for that reason, I run Inexorable Assault. On the next row, you can pretty much choose between Runic Attenuation or Murderous Efficiency. I run Murderous Efficiency because there's nothing worse than being rune starved during an obliteration window. It really kills your burst opportunities, and it feels really bad. And so after originally running Runic Attenuation, I have switched to Murderous Efficiency. The other thing is that I find myself runic power capped a lot. And so the value from Runic Attenuation really goes down, because during your obliterate windows, your priority is killing machine procs, brine proc Howling Blasts, and then Frost Strikes. So there's a lot of situations where you're going to be using obliterate, Howling Blast over and over, because you keep getting brine procs, and so you're runic power capped and you're never actually spending that runic power because you keep getting Howling Blast procs, which is a good thing. It's not something to be upset about. It's a good thing. If you're running dual wield, then I would suggest Runic Attenuation. A lot of your damage in those situations with dual wield is going to be more focused on Frost Strike and less so on obliterate damage. And so I'd run Runic Attenuation with dual wield, but ideally you're going to be running a two-hander and you're going to want to go with Murderous Efficiency. For the next row, the CC row, Blinding Sleet I pretty much always run. I love Blinding Sleet. The fact that we have the Dragon Stun available now with the Absolute Zero Legendary means that the Asphyxiate isn't really needed anymore for the stun. It can be decent for an off stun, but the combo of Blinding Sleet and Frostworm's Fury lets you set up a lot of damage opportunities Another thing about Blinding Sleet is that it operates like a fear, in that it has a threshold for damage before it breaks. So it's not like a rogue blind that instantly breaks. So I can set up my damage. I can blind this guy. I can pop Remorseless Winter. I can dot him, and he's still blinded. And then I can start doing obliterate damage, right? So it lets you buy time to start dealing your damage. Say for example, as well, you can either use it after you grip someone, you blind them so that you can line up your Frostborn's Fury stun and then Chill Streak. Or if you're able to get the stun Chill Streak off without having to use the blind, you can use the blind after the stun to keep them in that Chill Streak range as it continues to bounce for a couple extra seconds. So Blinding Sleet is very versatile, and it's very useful, and it's very nice. I really enjoy it. For the next row, it pretty much comes down to two-hander, Avalanche, dual wield, Frozen Pulse. Avalanche is a great talent. It's kind of like an Inexorable Assault where it's not huge, but it contributes to your main burst window, and it does so in a way that is useful. It's not game changing, but it's useful. If you're running Murderous Efficiency and Obliteration, then during your burst window you're very rarely going to have fewer than 3 full runes. You get a lot of rune gain between these two talents, so Frozen Pulse loses value because it doesn't contribute a ton of damage during the windows when you need that damage the most. Whereas Avalanche contributes consistent, steady damage. Every other global during your Pillar of Frost is going to be an Obliterate, and every Obliterate is a 45% chance to get a Rhyme proc, which is extra Avalanche damage on top of the damage that Howling Blast deals itself. So, two-hand, Avalanche, dual wield, Frozen Pulse. The next row is your mobility and survivability. Right now with the current meta, it comes down to pretty much Wraithwalk for mobility or Death Pact for survivability. If the meta were slower and it was more of a dampening meta instead of a die and a stun meta, then you would go with Permafrost for survivability instead of Death Pact. But because of how slingshotty health bars are and how bursty the meta is, you want to run Death Pact for survivability or Wraithwalk for mobility. I run Death Pact generally. I feel really squishy as a DK a lot of times, and especially for Battlegrounds, random Battlegrounds. If you're not running with a healer that you know is reliable, then Death Pact will save your skin a lot. For the next row, I pretty much always run Gathering Storm. Similarly to Avalanche, it's a talent that just contributes to your burst windows, and you don't have to think about it. You don't have to do anything special. It's just more damage during that 12-second pillar window that can help you secure kills, apply pressure, and just clown on the enemy team. Alternatively, Glacial Advance could be good if you're running Rune of the Fallen Crusader, which we'll get into Rune Forges later. But it applies Razor Ice in a cleave fashion to targets kind of in a cone or a straight line in front of you. It does contribute to your Obliteration window as well. It gives you that Killing Machine proc, so it can be useful. But I prefer Gathering Storm just for the ease of use and for more focus on that single target pressure during Obliteration so that you can really eliminate priority targets. For the final row, Obliteration is the reason that Two-Handed Frost is so strong right now. So if you're running two-hander, you're running Obliteration. It allows you to just alternate Killing Machine obliterates into people for massive damage, especially when combined with an Inexorable Assault stacks. You're consistently going to get between 7 to 8k obliterate crits consistently, plus 800, 900 damage from an Inexorable Assault, and that's every other global. You're just alternating those juicy obliterates into your target. If you are running dual wield, Breath of Sintragosa would be the go-to option for pure damage and burst, and Ice Cap could be a decent option for consistent damage. So this is the standard two-hand option talent build, and if you're dual wielding, then you're either going to go one of these. But again, two-hander is something that you do in the meantime until you're able to get, dual wield is something that you do in the meantime until you're able to get a good two-hander. So next we'll go into PvP talents. Right, so the first talent to talk about is Chill Streak. you will always run Chill Streak. The combination of Chill Streak and Frostworm's Fury Stun is what single-handedly makes Frost so good right now. Obliteration is great, yeah, it's great, sure. But Chill Streak and your ability to set up your own Chill Streaks is what makes Frost so strong right now. Alright, so you will always run Chill Streak. These next two talents are how you will usually run it, but not always. So first I'll talk about Heartstop Aura, because that is the priority talent. It's a great talent for gaining a step on CD trading. Right, so if you pop your Pillar of Frost and they pop a 1 minute defensive cooldown to counter it, you can guarantee with Heartstop Aura that when your next pillar is available, their defensive CD will not be. So Heartstop is great for gaining an advantage in longer drawn out matches. It's great for sticking to targets because it affects all of their abilities. It affects their movement abilities, their defensives, their offensive abilities even. So classes like Paladin that rely on a cooldown based rotation are really screwed over by Heartstop Aura. It's just a really effective talent. And the next talent, Necrotic Aura, you will generally run this, especially if you're playing with a lot of caster classes. It increases your own damage by 8%, which is great, especially when you consider that your main damage dealers are Chill Streak, Frost Fever, Killing Machine Obliterates, which now deal frost damage. In your burst window, you're going to have Frostworm's Fury, you're going to have a Bomb Limb, and so this pretty much increases all of your important damage by 8%, which is amazing. But there are a couple other options. So you always run Chill Streak, you usually run Necrotic, and you usually run Heartstop. Right? Another option that you might run is Delirium. Heartstop and Delirium is amazing for extremely mobile enemies who can kite a slow class like DK into the dirt. It really limits their ability to use abilities such as Blink, Disengage, Shadow Step. You will pretty much only have to deal with 2 Shimmer charges, 1 Disengage, 2 Shadow Step charges for a Sub-Rogue at any point throughout a fight, because it will just take so long for those charges to recover. Another tech option is Dome of Ancient Shadows, which increases the damage reduction of your AMZ to 80% total. Now there is a concern with this PvP talent that it's bugged for teammates. It provides you with the 80% damage reduction, but it doesn't provide it for teammates. And so it remains to be seen if this is going to be fixed or not. Another talent that you will rarely run, Cadaverous Polar. This is good for facing heavy caster comps. It's good for your own survivability, but it's really mainly useful if you have a healer behind you who can dispel those diseases. But even if you don't, it's great for nullifying burst and making it into sustained damage, which you can then heal back with Death Strike or Lichborn Death Coil healing. So it's a solid option. It's just not as good as the other options that you have. Death Chill can be decent for setting up grip stuns into Chill Streak, but you already have a lot of tools for setting those up, and so it's kind of overkill, and you're probably better off running a more effective aura. And finally, Dark Sim is a lot of fun. It can be really useful in certain situations. It can be a lot of fun to use. You can really troll people with it. It's just, for my own personal taste, it's not consistent enough to compete with running the double aura setup. Next, we'll go into stat weights. So ultimately for Frost, every stat is going to be good for you. A nice balance is always good, but at the end of the day, what you have are mastery and versatility are way up here, and crit and haste are way below them. Still good, but way below them. And your preference for all 4 talents pretty much comes down to how you want to build your character. So for a pure offensive build, you want mastery and then verse, and then way down here either crit or haste. A little bit of both, but either crit or haste. And the way it works is that if you're going for more sustained damage, you want more crit. If you're going for more burst damage, you want more haste. And the reason for that is obliteration windows. So the main damage from your obliteration window is going to come from those Killing Machine Obliterates, which are guaranteed crits, which reduces the value of crit, increases the value of haste, because the lower you can get your global cooldown, if you can squeeze out 1 more obliterate during that window, it's a much bigger damage increase then adding crit to an attack that is already a guaranteed crit. So for an offensive build, you got Mastery, and then just below it Verse, and then way below those you got crit for burst, or I'm sorry, crit for sustained, or haste for burst. If you're going for a more balanced option, then you just swap Mastery and Verse. So you have Verse, just below that you have Mastery, and then way below those you have crit for sustained or haste for burst. Now with that in mind, as you're gearing up, getting your great vault rewards, a lot of times you're just going to want to go with the highest eye level piece that's available. For instance, last week my great vault rewards were kind of trash, and so I ended up going with a crit burst helm. Even though there is a mastery helm that exists, this was the best one I had available, so I went with it, and now I can use the conquest that I would have used on my helmet to upgrade my other slots before I circle back to the helmet to get the better upgrade. So don't worry too much about the secondary stats on your gear. Go for the highest eye level that you can get. And then as the season progresses, you can circle back and kind of fine-tune what you want to cover at that point. Real quick, while we're talking about gear, I'll just mention trinkets real quick. So PvP trinket is preference. You always want to run the 2-set bonus. But for your medallion option, it's preference. I highly recommend using the on-use. Unless you are a human or potentially an orc. If you're a human, then you can go with the double DPS trinket option for increased damage, and make every other DK jealous that you get to use double DPS trinkets. But for non-humans, I recommend using the medallion. It'll save your life. The other ones are just not consistent enough and too easy to play around. And then for your DPS trinket, you want to use the on-use trinket. It lines up perfectly with your pillar, and that is far more important than the sustained damage you get from the RNG trinket. Furthermore, the Conquest version of this trinket gives crit, which will be great for giving you a nice, decent baseline crit. Your rotation with Killing Machine procs and such really smooths out around 10% crit. And so, despite the fact that your gearing will not put a high priority on crit, the fact that you get a little bit from your trinket will really help you smoothen out your rotation and get those consistent Killing Machine procs outside of your Obliterate windows. Next we'll go into Enchants. So there's a couple new Enchants that are available right now with Shadowlands. So first, don't forget 15 strength to your gloves. Helps out. For your chest, there's pretty much two different routes you can take. You can get with the 30 primary stats, which is more for general use or multi-target situations, or you can go with Eternal Skirmish, which is more pure single target damage. I recommend going with 30 stats. The only reason I'm running Eternal Skirmish on this right now is I was testing it out earlier. I never changed it back because I want to get rid of this chest, and so I'm not going to bother spending the gold to change it. I'm just going to get my new chests next week when I get the Conquest, and I'm going to put 30 stats on it. So even though this one's running Eternal Skirmish, I recommend running 30 stats. The spread pressure is great. The single target damage is similar. It slightly favors Eternal Skirmish, but it's similar, but you add a little bit of cleave pressure, of spread pressure with Frost Fever, and it contributes to all of your damage as opposed to just your single target damage. So I recommend 30 stats. The next enchant to talk about is your Cloak. There's a couple options here. You can either go 20 stam with the minor speed increase, you can go 20 stam with Leech, or you can go 30 stam. Those are the only three I would really consider. I recommend 20 stam with the speed increase because every little bit of mobility helps. It'll help when you're being kited, it'll help you move around the battleground. And so I would never really consider switching anything out for this option. If you really don't care about the movement speed, I would go with Leech, and then under that I would go with the 30 stam. But it really comes down to speed or Leech for me, and it's a preference option for however you want to build your character. I highly recommend the speed. The Leech isn't really enough to make a difference, and with how much you run around during a battleground, the speed can really add up over time. Finally, you have the boot enchant. Soul Treads reduces damage taken when you fall. not really a game changer, but there's a lot of instances in a battleground where you might be jumping off a graveyard or jumping off, you know, whatever precipice that lies before you, and this just makes you take a little bit less damage from it. So it's useful. It's not a game changer, but it's useful, so don't forget to throw that on there. And finally, we'll talk about rune forges, right? And so there's pretty much 2 rune forges that you will be considering. Because we're just talking about random battlegrounds and not arenas, you're not really going to consider any tech options, right? So, you know, arena guys, you might think about putting a weapon with Rune of Spell Warding if you face a double caster cleave, or Rune of Sanguination for double DPS 2s to give you some survivability. Forget that, right? This is just random BGs. You're just trying to, you know, punch people into the dirt. So you're either going to run Razor Ice or you're going to run Rune of Fallen Crusader. Razor Ice is more of your single target option. Fallen Crusader is more of your spread pressure option. It's worth noting that Rune of Fallen Crusader only gives 10% strength in PvP, which makes these a little closer than you might originally think. I personally run Razor Ice because so much of your damage and so much of your viability is based around your single target and cleave pressure, and Razor Ice contributes to that. The stacking debuff for frost damage lets you get those even juicier obliterates, and who doesn't want to see some big ass obliterates, right? It feels good. Rune of Fallen Crusader is a decent option, especially if you decide that you want to pair it with Glacial Advance to still build up those Razor Ice stacks. But another thing worth considering is that Rune of Razor Ice is going to scale better than Rune of Fallen Crusader, right? As the expansion progresses, your percentage of available mastery stats is going to increase at a faster rate than strength, right? Your strength increase is going to be more linear compared to your mastery increase, which is going to be more exponential. And so as you build up better gear and you get more secondary stat point allocation, Razor Ice is going to get better and better. But even without that in mind, I would still recommend Razor Ice, because at the end of the day, your contribution is single target and cleave, and it's not spread pressure, right? You're not an Unholy DK trying to rot down an entire team. You are trying to sit on priority targets and eliminate them. So for that reason, I recommend Rune of Razor Ice. Rune of Fallen Crusader is still good, right? It also gives you that 6% heal, which is nice, and you can really go either way. But I run Razor Ice, I prefer Razor Ice, and I recommend Razor Ice. So next, we will talk about Covenants. For a Death Knight, there's pretty much only 2 options for Covenants. You can either run Kyrian, or you can run Necrolord. I recommend Necrolord. And the reason I recommend Necrolord is that I believe Kyrian is more of a single target, dueling, single target, defensive option, whereas Necrolord is more of a battleground, cleave, disruption option. So you can really go either way. I highly recommend Necrolord, right? Abomination Limb is amazing. You're going to love using it. It's so strong. It's great for grouping enemies up so that you can get a big Frostworm's Fury stun, chill streak them, and cleave them all down. It's really amazing for that. It's a lot of fun to use, and it's strong. It gives you a Rhyme proc so that you can start your Pillar window, your Obliterate window, with a Rhyme proc right away. So you're instantly dealing damage during that window, which means that you don't have to wait for a Killing Machine proc before you Rhyme, or before you Pillar. Right? You can go right into Pillar, Rhyme, Obliterate. So I highly recommend Necrolord. You can still go Kyrian, but I would not go with one of the other 2, with Venthyr or Night Fae. They can be decent in certain situations, but I highly recommend Necrolord. You're going to love Abomination. It's so much fun to use. It fits perfectly with DK Fantasy. It fits perfectly with our playstyle, and it's really satisfying to bust out the slappy hands and just smack people into the dirt. So highly recommend Necrolord. As far as Soulbinds go, I'll cover Kyrian first real quick. If you go Kyrian, you're going to go Pelagos. Pretty much end of story. The juicy mastery buff that you get from activating your Kyrian ability through Pelagos is the reason that you go with Pelagos. Mastery is arguably our best stat, unless you're going with that defensive build or balanced build that I talked about before, in which case it's your second best stat. But still, Mastery is extremely good for Frost, and so for that reason, singularly, you're going to go with Pelagos. Now, if you go with Necrolord, you pretty much have 2 options. You can go with Plague Divisor Merilith for more of a balanced defensive utility option, or you can go with a many for the pure damage option. The problem with Merilith right now, if that's the option that interests you, is that you don't get deep enough into the tree to get the really useful talent. This absorb is decent. It's not great. It's 15% for 10 seconds. So, you know, it's useful, but unfortunately this first talent is pretty much worthless. What I found in BGs is that channeling near a dead enemy only gives you this buff if they have not yet released their spirit, which makes it really difficult to actually benefit from that mastery buff. If you can get it, it's nice, and it would make Plague Divisor a lot more useful if you could consistently get it, but it's really difficult to run over to an enemy and channel Fleshcraft before they release, especially with how many people instantly release when they die. Now, as we move deeper into the X-Pack, and you can have this defensive talent on top of ultimate form, Merilith will get a lot more value. I would still, in that situation, go a many, but I can understand why people would like Merilith for the utility and the defensive option. I like a many. I go with a many because of lead by example. This gives you extra strength for your entire burst window, right? It's 20 seconds, which lines up perfectly with the duration of Empowered Rune Weapon. So you can have 20 seconds of this strength buff, a bomb limb smacking people in the face, a Empowered Rune Weapon giving you resources and haste, and make those damage windows very, very powerful. As I go through the tree, I always go for the Potency Conduit. No matter what, I always go for the Potency Conduit. My personal opinion, without really being able to test the talents deeper in the trees, my personal opinion is that the Potency Conduit will always provide more damage than whatever damage option is available through the other conduits, through their paths. So I always go with the Potency Conduit on the first row, the second row is whatever, you know, and then down here I'll go with the Potency Conduit again, even though this is kind of meh. It's not bad, but always go with the Potency Conduit. Another reason that I think a many is really good is because this tier for everyone is useless, but for a many, this actually has some value in a battleground. You know, if you get knocked off or you fall or whatever, it actually gives you some value. You get a shield that absorbs, so you pretty much don't lose the health. And something interesting to note is that this pairs really well with Soul Treads, because it gives you a shield for the damage that you would have lost, the full damage that you would have lost. It doesn't account for the reduced damage from Soul Treads. So, you know, if you fall and you would have lost 4k health, but you only lost 3k because of Soul Treads, this will give you a 4k shield, even though you only lost 3k health. So you effectively gained 1k health by actually taking fall damage. And so it's not like game breaking, but it's nice and it's better than, you know, opening lockboxes or, you know, improving the durability of your armor, or, you know, getting an extra Hearthstone, which doesn't really give you much value inside of Battleground. So this is low-key pretty strong. Another thing I noticed is that when you take that fall damage, this actually deals damage to people around you. So it's not going to happen often, but if you're in a situation where you fall down onto a group of enemies, you will actually deal a little bit of damage to them. So those are the Soulbinds. Again, I recommend a many. Pure damage, really nice. Lead by example. Buffs your enemy or buffs your allies, and gives you even more strength based on the allies, on how many allies you buffed. And it actually has a useful talent on this row, unlike many others. And so, with that in mind, we will go into conduits. So first, we'll talk about potency conduits. And there's pretty much two ways to build your potency conduits. You can either go for burst damage or sustained damage, and they're similar at the end of the day. So for sustained damage, your best option is Everfrost. So if you're going for sustained damage, you want your first conduit to be Everfrost. Your second conduit would be Accelerated Cold. And you get honorable mention for Unleashed Frenzy, good sustained damage, strength increase. I don't like it particularly much because it requires ramp. 6 seconds is not a particularly long duration, but if you're able to stick to a target or stick to any target at any time, you know, swapping to whoever's closest or whatever, it does provide nice, steady damage increase. So honorable mention Unleashed Frenzy, but Accelerated Cold and Everfrost are your two best for sustained damage. For burst damage, it's going to be kind of similar. Accelerated Cold is your best option. It contributes to your pillar windows, and the reduced cooldown makes it line up almost perfectly with Frostwyrm's Fury. 1.5 minute cooldown, 1.6 minute cooldown, which is like a minute and 38 seconds. So, you know, if you hold Frostwyrm's Fury for 8 seconds, you can pair it with your next Empower Rune weapon. But the haste increase is huge for getting an extra global or two out of your pillar window. And it's just overall a strong talent. So for your burst option, you're going to go Accelerate Cold, and your next best, boom, Everfrost. So these two really end up being really strong when paired together. Now for that burst window, the other one to consider, instead of Unleash Frenzy, is Brutal Grasp. So Brutal Grasp and Everfrost are actually pretty much equal for a burst build, right? And it pretty much comes down to where you want that damage to be coming from. I believe that Everfrost is going to scale better as we get more and more mastery, since a bomb limb is shadow damage and won't scale with our mastery. So I'd go with Everfrost even for the burst, but because these are arguably the two best for both burst and sustain, I suggest overall your first one, pick one, and your second one, pick the other, right? So when I get down here, when I get Renown 28, I'm going to pop Everfrost in there, and I'm going to go on my way. Now, the next one is the Endurance Conduits. There's pretty much two options, 2.5 options here. Insatiable Appetite for sustain healing, overcoming sustained damage, and Hardened Bones for another burst defensive cooldown, or anti-burst defensive cooldown. I'm running Insatiable Appetite because Death Strike sucks, and Insatiable Appetite makes it not suck quite as much. Hardened Bones would be nice. I probably wouldn't really consider running it until I could get a conduit that was about 10%. I previously said that I would go with Hardened Bones, but after using Insatiable Appetite, it makes Death Strike not suck as much, and it gives Death Strike enough oomph to keep me up while a healer is able to stabilize and hopefully top me off. So I run Insatiable Appetite, but between these two, you could probably pretty much go for whichever one's higher eye level. But again, it pretty much comes down to sustain healing, or sustained defensive capabilities, or burst defensive capabilities, sorry. And then a tech option would be Reinforced Shell. If you find yourself often running Dome of Ancient Shadows for that big juicy AMZ, then I would go with Reinforced Shell. Longer duration, bigger radius, very powerful, but I probably wouldn't really consider that until they fix Dome of Ancient Shadows, because as it stands right now, I am pretty sure that it's still bugged. So I would ignore that for now, and I would choose between these two, depending on preference. For your Finesse Conduits, none of these really make a huge difference. I go with Chilled Resilience, especially as we move up to higher ranks of this trait, or this conduit. It'll get your IBF cooldown down to almost 2 minutes flat, which will be amazing. Not just because of the defensive utility, but because of your ability to immune stuns with it, and how powerful stuns are in the game right now. Chilled Resilience, I don't really see any other option. If you really want, you could go with Fleeting Wind for the increased movement speed, so it's harder to be kited. Spirit Drain I don't really recommend for the two-hand build, because as I mentioned in the talent section, I'm very often rune capped. I very often runic power capped. I very often am runic power capped and then keep spending runes that make me even further runic power capped, and so I don't really see the need to have any extra runic power. If you're dual wield, then this could be very strong, because as I mentioned before, a lot of your damage in a dual wield spec is going to come from Frost Strike as opposed to Obliterate, and so in that situation, Spirit Drain could be really good for giving you some extra damage after an interrupt. But I often find myself not needing that runic power, and you know, especially in a battleground when you're going from battle to battle, and you're not entering every battle with all your cooldowns, having a reduced cooldown on IBF so that it's more likely to be available when you need it is very powerful. So I'd pretty much consider these three. Unending Grip I think could be decent, but ultimately everyone should be slowed already. So an extra 26% slower or whatever, depending on your conduit, shouldn't really be needed. You know, you should be changing everyone. Blinding Sleet slows them by 50%. Chill Streak slows them by 70%. You should be stunning them. You should be gripping them with a bomb limb and whatever. You know, they should already be slowed. And so, as far as the value that this talent brings compared to the others, I would, go with what I said: Chilled Resilience, or Fleeting Wind, or if you're dual wield, you can go with Spirit Drain. But I would go with Chilled Resilience pretty much always. All right, and then finally, as far as gearing and whatnot goes, we'll go over Legendaries. And lo and behold, there's one Legendary, right? You want Absolute Zero. End of story. This is what makes Frost so good right now, right? Frost is good right now because of Absolute Zero and Chill Streak, and your ability to set up your own Chill Streaks with Absolute Zero. All right, so you run Absolute Zero. End of story. It's so powerful. You can hypothetically stun an entire team for 3 seconds, do a full damage rotation, 3 seconds stun on them, 5-second blind on everyone but your main target, and just annihilate everyone. So you will always run Absolute Zero. There's no reason to ever not run Absolute Zero. It's fairly easy to get. You just have to do the Torghast Wing. I would bet that most Death Knights probably have this memory by now. And if you don't, it's just a week or two until you can get it again. But you will always run Absolute Zero. That's the Legendary section. Just for the sake of further exploring the other options, Biting Cold is a good cleave option. It's strong. And Cold Tear's Favor is good for increasing your main damage of Obliterate in those burst windows. Helps with the rune gen as well. Make sure you never run out of rune gen. I'll touch on Death's Embrace real quick because I know a lot of people probably thought this would be good for Frosts. It's not anywhere near as good as it is for Unholy because of the Spell Eater talent for Unholy, which when combined with Death's Embrace makes your AMS like 24 seconds or something like that. Whereas for Frost without Spell Eater, it caps out at like 12 or 13 seconds or so. So it's decent, but you want Absolute Zero. End of story. Like, that is the talent. So if there's ever a time when we can wear more than one Legendary, then I would go with either Biting Cold for cleave pressure or Cold Tear's Favor for single target pressure. But as it stands right now, Absolute Zero. Absolute Zero combined with Chill Streak is what makes Frost good. So it makes Frost as good as it is right now. So that's pretty much it. So real quick before we go, I will just go over the opening rotation that you want to use as Frost. So pretty much what's going to happen is you want to, as you're entering the fight, you want to use Remorseless Winter and Abomination Limb. I use Abomination Limb with my Empowered Rune Weapon in the opener because the strength buff from a Bomb Limb and the haste and rune gen from Empowered Rune Weapon both last 20 seconds. So I line them up with the opener. I usually use Remorseless Winter first as I'm going into the fight, and then I Bomb Limb to get people gripped onto me. And then I use Pillar, Frostworm's Fury, Chill Streak. Now the timing of that will be a little different because you want to hit at least 2 people stacked with Frostworm's Fury so that you can get a Chill Streak off for full damage, right? So you use Remorseless Winter, a Bomb Limb, and Powered Rune Weapon, and maybe a Death Grip in there to get people stacked. You can Blinding Sleet to keep them stacked to line up your Frostworm's Fury, or if you don't need the Blinding Sleet, then you can just, Frostworm's Fury right away and go into your burst rotation. But you want Pillar of Frost active when you use Frostworms and Chill Streak because these 2 abilities alone deal a lot of damage. And so you want to add to that damage, and you want that strength buff to be active while they're dealing damage. Whatever. All right. So as I'm going in the fight, Remorseless Winter, a Bomb Limb, Pillar, Dragon's Breath, Chill Streak, which won't bounce on this guy, and then you just alternate a Blitz with either Rime Howling Blasts, which you'll get a lot of, or when you don't, you'll just pop Frost Strike. And if you don't have that, Rime proc right away, like I got one a half second later because I get it from a Bomb Limb, but just go with the Frost Strike and go into the Obliterate. It's more important to use every possible Killing Machine proc than it is to use every Rime proc, right? So much of your damage is going to come from Obliterate. As you can see, during that window, 33% of my damage from Obliterate. Almost 10k damage off one. Frostworms looks really juicy right there, but it deals 50% reduced damage in PvP. Even though this is a PvP dummy, I don't know why it's not reduced in half. But Chill Streak would be probably around Obliterate's damage, if not more, if there were a second target to cleave off of. And you can see that Inexorable Assault, you know, average hit 1k, average hit 7.7. So the combination of those two averages for 8.7 every time. This is almost 10k max. This is 2k max. So that's potentially 12k in a global because of Inexorable Assault. Frost Fever, if there's ever more than one target, that damage will add up a lot more. Same with Avalanche, and same with Remorseless Winter. So there you have it. That is my Frosty K guide, and hopefully that will help you push whatever rating that you want to push, and do whatever thing that you want to do. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. If you enjoyed the video, please let me know, like, subscribe, whatever. If you want to see me play my Death Knight in rated Battlegrounds, we are currently between 2.5 and 2.6 MMR in RBGs. Please check out my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Zaronce. If you enjoy the content, hit me with a follow, and I hope to see y'all there. All right, take care.